Good day, North Toronto Church family. Today is April the 1st, 2020, and we are still under tight restrictions due to the COVID-19 effect in the world. I'm going to be thinking about suffering today as we look forward to Holy Week next week and then Good Friday and Easter on the Christian calendar. Christians have very specific beliefs about suffering that are very different from the other major religious faiths. And our Bible reading today is from Romans chapter 8, starting at verse 18. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. The creation was subject to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. To fully understand our relationship to suffering as Christian followers, we have to go back to the relationship between suffering and glory. There's the most incredible misunderstandings out there in the world about Christians and suffering. They always seem to hark back to hair shirts and self-flagellation. And you know, don't you, that it's not that all Christians have to rush out and subject themselves to suffering. Although I have counseled those who have experienced the call to mission on their lives, sometimes to go where the suffering is, to run where the pain is, we don't generally seek out suffering. That would be masochism. And it's definitely not the fact that suffering is good. It is not. It's something we fight against in medicine and in officership and in the Salvation Army in general with its members. We seek to serve suffering humanity, and that means to alleviate suffering, the suffering that's been brought on by COVID-19, the suffering that's been brought on by sin everywhere. Suffering is destructive, it's corrosive, and we seek to minimize it for others as we aim to rid the world of it. But it's a fact that life involves some suffering, and Paul is trying to point out in Romans chapter 8, not the virtues of suffering, definitely not the glory of suffering, but that suffering and glory are linked. Like the pounding of the waves is linked to the beautiful caves and flower pots in the cliffs of Nova Scotia's Cabot Trail, or like the clouds are part of a beautiful sunset, or like the grid of sand in a scallop is necessary to the formation of a pearl. God allows it, although he does not wish it on anyone. If we claim to be disciples of the crucified one, we must expect to participate in his sufferings. If we speak about the cross, we will have to become a community of the cross. Anything else would represent a kind of hypocrisy. Our theology is only authentic, only for real, as it gives birth to a community that suffers with Christ in the world. Now let me remind you that the glory we speak of is present as well as future. Jesus did say in his prayer, I have given them the glory you gave me, God, past tense. There is a continuity between what we experience now and the fullness of glory we will experience, like the sameness between a hummingbird sipping nectar and a man gulping down grape juice at a banquet. The sameness between being fed by manna and experiencing the feeding of the 5,000 with 7 basketfuls of bread left over. Ulrich Simon said, the music of the spheres of immortal life is already part of our experience now. Freedom and joy light up like sparks of God's presence in the dark paths as its strings, woodwinds, trumpets, and percussion intone the triumph over evil, that we are expecting and looking forward to. How infinitely small appear our torments as the eternal harmony resolves them in glory. We are critically aware of the dangers of make-believe. A self-made projection of our own hopes is not rooted in fact. He who is, creates and sustains such an order of things as fulfills the aspiration of a believer's hopes as we rest in him. The God of Auschwitz and Katrina and 9/11 and COVID-19 is not made in the image of our despair, but rather meets our despair by his total otherness, his reality, which is devoid of suffering. He is not the ground of our rotten and rotting world despite the cross, but the ground of what we are not fully and must yet become. Since we are by nature finite beings, each of us limited by space-time, none of us will ever experience directly more than one life's worth of God's glory as we participate in his sufferings. What each of us comes to know are fragments of something immeasurably larger than we can grasp. My neighbor knows other fragments, which may well be the ones that make sense of my own. So I must turn to my neighbor in search of understanding, in search of the priestly ministries that can flow from each person's experience to one's neighbor. And my neighbor will need to turn to others too, perhaps even me. This is an ongoing, never-ending process that is characteristic of human life. A continual process of stretching and being stretched out before God. Speaking of stretching, verse 22 of Romans chapter 8 says, "We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth." Men use the illustration of a woman in labor so much, don't they? God knows they don't know anything about being in labor. I have an illustration of a man talking about his wife in labor, but I think I came up with a possible analogy of my husband's that might come close. And that's when he's watching his beloved Blue Jays play. He's groaning as he watches them fumble the ball again, but he never wavers in his belief that they are going to make it to complete the game in absolute stunning glory. Now for the man's illustration, he says many of us have pictures of our wives after they've delivered a child, and typically the baby is in their arms and the mother is radiant. None of us have a picture of our wives in labor. We do not reach into our wallets saying, "Let me show you a picture of Margaret groaning in labor. Isn't the agony terrific?" No, we don't. Creation will one day be delivered, and the difference between then and now is the difference between agony and ecstasy. Our groaning creation is in the process of coming into the glorious freedom of the children of God. Think what will happen when all of nature is free to produce as it was designed to produce, free from pestilence and plague, danger and sin. We are on the way to seeing that day. And every time we pray the Lord's Prayer, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done," we are drawing the future into the present. Every time we try to make it right and try to make someone's suffering less and try to help alleviate their suffering, we are drawing that future into the present. And so we talk about Jesus' words on glory, knowing that in the anguish, because of the joy that is set before us, we will forget it as something paltry and minuscule compared to the great joy and glory that we will experience as Jesus overcomes the world. In closing, I'd like to read you a poem called "Can You Drink the Cup?" Can you drink the cup? Drink. Not survey or analyze, ponder or scrutinize from a distance, but drink, imbibe, ingest, but with audacious draughts that spill down your chin and onto your chest. Can you drink the cup? The cup of rejection and opposition, betrayal and regret. like vinegar and gall, pungent and tart, making you wince and recoil, but satisfy and sustain. Can you drink the cup? Yes, you, with your insecurities, you with the doubts that nibble around the edges, you with your impetuous starts and youth-like bursts of love and devotion, you with your giving up too soon or too late and being so very hard on yourself. You with your yeses, buts, and I'm sorry's again. Yes, you with all your weakness, all the horror and inadequacy represented by the cross. You, but with God's grace. Can you drink the cup? Yes, with God's grace.